Well, the magic of the show is the family. You know, the dynamics of the family and the stories that 1,000 people a day have. You know, it's very interesting to see why people need money and why they come to the pawn shop. Seth Gold's life took a devastating turn that no one saw coming. He wasn't just a pawn shop owner. He was the face of Hardcore Pawn, a show that turned his family's business into a household name. His father, Les Gold, built an empire, and Seth was expected to follow in his footsteps. But was there a hidden struggle no one ever noticed? Tune in, because the truth about Seth Gold is so tragic. The President of the U.S. wanted to personally help him. The pawn shop power struggle behind the scenes was more intense than it seemed. Seth, the so-called brains behind the shop's marketing success, was struggling with pressures no one talked about. The fame, the expectations, the non-stop business. It all added up. Unlike his father, who thrived on the chaos, Seth had a different vision. He wanted to modernize the business, bring in fresh ideas, and move away from the drama that made Hardcore Pawn such a hit. But change wasn't easy. And, in a family business, it's even harder when the person standing in your way is your own father. Before we go any further, it's clear that the tension behind the scenes was far worse than anyone realized, and this won't be the only revelation that will leave you stunned. The cracks in the empire started showing sooner than anyone realized. Seth may have had a degree from the University of Michigan and big ideas for the business, but he wasn't the one calling the shots. Les was still the boss, and he wasn't about to give up control. Tensions between father and son grew, and it didn't take long for the stress to spill over onto the show. Viewers saw arguments, heated exchanges, and moments where it was clear that the family wasn't always on the same page. What they didn't see was just how deep the divide had become. Hardcore Pawn wasn't just a TV show, it was a business. Strategy. The fights, the confrontations, the over-the-top reactions, they all made for great television, but they weren't always real. The more outrageous the drama, the higher the ratings. But not everyone in the Gold family was comfortable with this. Seth wasn't interested in being a TV villain. He wanted to build a business, not a spectacle. The more the show pushed for drama, the more he pulled back. And when the cameras stopped rolling, the pressure didn't. Things started to unravel, faster than anyone expected. While the show was bringing in millions of viewers, it was also bringing in problems. The Gold family became celebrities, but with that fame came scrutiny. Seth had spent years working to make American Jewelry and Loan a legitimate business, but now it was being seen as just another reality TV sideshow. Customers didn't come in just to pawn their valuables. They came in to see a fight, to stir up trouble, to get their 15 minutes of fame. For someone like Les, this was just part of the game. For him, it was a nightmare. The show ended, but the damage had already been done. You know, it's Mother's Day coming up, and you know what great gifts for Mom are: sterling silver and cubic zirconium. I just came from the West Coast and brought back brand new inventory. American Jewelry and Loan was still standing, but it wasn't the same. The pawn business was changing, and reality TV had left its mark. Seth, once the rising star of the business, started stepping back. He wasn't in it for the fame, and he wasn't interested in playing a character anymore. He saw what the show had done to his family, his business, and his own reputation, and he knew that if he wanted to build something real, he had to walk away. But walking away wasn't easy. The Gold family had built an empire together, and stepping back meant leaving behind everything he had worked for. The tension between father and son didn't just disappear. Les had spent his entire life running the business a certain way, and he had spent years trying to change it. In the end, something had to give, and for him that meant making a choice: stay in a business that no longer felt like his, or step away and start something new. The story of Seth isn't just about a pawn shop or a TV show. It's about what happens when fame and family collide. Hardcore Pawn turned the Gold family into household names, but it also changed them forever. Some thrived in the spotlight, while others found themselves drowning in it. Seth had always been different from his father, quieter, more strategic, less interested in the chaos. And in the end, that difference was what set him apart. Today, American Jewelry and Loan is still standing, but it's not the empire it once was. The show is over, the cameras are gone, and the world has moved on. But for Seth Gold, the impact of those years hasn't disappeared. The fame, the pressure, the fights, it all left a mark. And while he may have walked away from the family business, the legacy of Hardcore Pawn still follows him. The fights on TV were wild, but the biggest problems happened behind the scenes, where trust was shaky and betrayal caused real trouble. The show's biggest fights were off-camera. Hardcore Pawn was never just about gold chains and rare collectibles. It was a battlefield disguised as a pawn shop. And if you thought the biggest fights happened in front of the counter, you'd be dead wrong. Behind the scenes, the Gold family had its fair share of explosive moments, and one of the biggest came when Seth tried to pull a fast one on his father, selling the Pontiac location behind his back. Yeah, that didn't sit well with the old man. What followed was a clash so heated that fans thought Seth would be kicked off the show, but instead, they slapped a bandage on the wound and moved forward. Though, let's be real, wounds like that don't just disappear. Then there was Rich, the guy who had been with them for over 25 years, practically part of the furniture at American Jewelry and Loan. But loyalty doesn't always pay, and when a disagreement flared up on screen, it marked the beginning of the end for him. Sure, he apologized, but it didn't stop him from slowly fading into the background. Fans weren't fooled. They speculated he was let go because he was getting too popular, stealing the spotlight from the family that wanted all eyes on them. And if you thought that was the end of the drama, think again. Bobby Johns, another employee, later spilled the tea. Rich wasn't just dealing with work problems. His wife was out there throwing shade online, posting nasty comments about Bobby and stirring the pot even more. Eventually, enough was enough, and Rich was gone. But let's not pretend that was the last power struggle in the shop. Hardcore Pawn thrived on chaos, and the cameras were always rolling. By its sixth season, the show was pulling in over 2 million viewers per episode, peaking at more than 3 million in 2013. That's some serious staying power. Even celebrities wanted in on the action, like Aaron Paul from Breaking Bad, who casually dropped by the shop. And then there was the time the shop's owner bought something so shocking that even the most loyal fans were creeped out. The van used by Dr. Death himself, Jack Kevorkian, linked to over 100 self-destructions. It was a morbid piece of history, and he snagged it for $20,000. Did he flip it for a fortune? Not exactly. In the end, he barely made a $5,000 profit, deciding it just wasn't worth the space it took up. But that's exactly the kind of move that kept viewers hooked. The shop was never just about money. It was about spectacle. And speaking of spectacle, you can't run a pawn shop without dealing with shady business. Theft, betrayal, and broken trust were all part of the deal. One of the most jaw-dropping moments came when Joe, a supposedly trusted security guard, was caught stealing. It wasn't some over-the-top reality show stunt. It actually happened. Bobby confirmed it later, admitting that working there really was like being in a family, just one that sometimes turned on each other. And while the Gold family kept the shop running, the Detroit businessman at the heart of it all didn't just sit back and let the cameras define him.